I don't know about you, but when I was a teenager, hot hatches and hot Hondas were all the rage. I'm here in Sonoma, California today to answer the question, is the Type R that same kind of hot Honda, or is this grown up and perhaps a little more full-bodied like I am versus the 1990s? First, let's address the looks. They're definitely more grown up than the previous generation Type R because this Civic is a little bit more grown up than the last generation Civic. We have full LED headlights, just as you'd expect out of a modern car, and a wider front end treatment in the Type R than we find in the regular Civic. You'll really see that at the ends of these headlight modules where the body flares out a bit, but they use the same headlight modules that we find in a regular Civic. Of course, hot hatches are all about affordable, accessible performance. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the video though. Big Type R logo right there, red Honda logo, lots of cooling ducts going on. Interesting twist though, these ducts over here, these are actually fake. These are functional in this area. That's a brake cooling duct, so it wraps around, cools the brakes from the inside. This one is simply styling. Speaking of functional ducts, there's one of course on the top of the hood. This helps relieve pressure and improve cooling underneath the hood area, and it can also serve as a hand warmer on a cool and wet day like today. As before, the Type R is based on the Civic hatchback, but this shares a little bit less with the regular hatch than the previous generation did. As before, we have unique front quarter panels, unique bumper, and unique hood. We have the same doors as the regular hatchback and the same roof as the regular hatchback, but we have different doors and different quarter panels in the back. That's so they could give this a more aggressive fender flare in the rear, stuff wider tires on it, and not have that tacked on fender flare look that we had before. From this angle, you can really see the flared fender and where the extra width has been added. It's all on the outside of the headlight. In a regular Civic, this would be a lot sleeker, but a regular Civic doesn't have these tires. The width increase in the rear is the same as the front, but things blend a little bit better together because we have those unique quarter panels and the unique doors in the Type R that help the body start flaring just after the front doors and make this much more of a flowing curve around, again, those really wide tires, 265 with tires back here as well. Every true hot hatch needs a little business up front, a little party in the back, so of course we have a big black wing on the back of this Type R. If you wanted something a bit more discreet, it looks like it's going to be pretty easy to unbolt the wing from the brackets and then put an aftermarket wing on it. It's pretty sturdy though, so if you're worried about that, you can definitely use it to open and close the hatch because it is designed to add extra downforce to the vehicle, and as a result, it's really firmly attached. It also is a bit more discreet than the last model, dare I say, a little bit more grown up. Aside from the wing, the hatch itself and the taillights are the same as the regular Civic hatch, which means we don't get full LEDs back here, and I do think that's a bit of a misstep. I would love to see full LED taillights and a big aggressive light bar right across the rear. In this model, the light bar does not complete, so this portion is illuminated and then this is the center brake light, but when it's active, we don't have one continuous line of LEDs across the rear. That could have been cool. Of course, we have a big Type R logo right there, and from this angle, especially on that side, you can definitely see that aggressive flare because, again, the taillights are the same as the regular model. Not the same as the regular model, however, is this enormous triple tip exhaust system down there at the bottom. This is different than the previous generation Type R, where we had a smaller exhaust tip in the center and two big ones on the outside. That's because this now has an active exhaust system rather than the sort of semi-active system we found on the previous Type R. Behind this center tip, there's actually an electronically controlled valve. It opens to give this the loud bark that you'd expect out of a Type R, and then out on the highway or when you first start it up in quiet mode, or the comfort mode, I guess they're calling it, then it is a lot quieter so it won't wake your neighbors. Under the hood, we have the latest generation of Honda's Type R engine. It's still a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo, but the turbocharger has been upgraded for 2023, improving the horsepower and the torque totals, but also the horsepower and torque curves. Peak horsepower is 315 ponies, peak torque 310 pound-feet. As before, power is routed to the ground via a 6-speed manual transmission only, no CVT, no dual clutch, no automatic transmission under this hood, but also no all-wheel drive, and that might disappoint some shoppers. I really had hoped that the Type R would end up with all-wheel drive, but it doesn't. It is still a front-wheel drive hot hatch. Now, there is an argument to be made that that improves the purity of the Type R and also relieves some of the weight concerns that you might have with a vehicle like this. If they added all-wheel drive, it would likely add 200 to 300 pounds to the vehicle total. and it would probably hamper the 0 to 60 time. On the other hand, if you want that all-wheel drive experience, you will find it in some of the competition, most notably the GR Corolla, the Golf R, also known as the Golfer to me, and of course the Subaru WRX, or the Subaru Works. As you'd expect out of a performance model, we have performance bucket front seats. These have very aggressive side bolstering on the seat bottom cushion. I love that. That's something that's overlooked in a lot of performance seats, and pretty aggressive bolstering on the side. Now the bolstering is not adjustable, so if you're smaller than I am, you might find yourself swimming around in the seats, but I found these to be incredibly comfortable for my body shape. We also have a shoulder section to the seat that is not as narrow and confining as some sport designs. We still have a manual tilt telescopic steering column, but the most impressive thing about this, I think, on the inside is the fact that I can lower this seat all the way down, have about 4 inches of headroom left, meaning that I can wear a helmet in here if I'm on an autocross course or a racetrack where a helmet is required. And you could do that even if you're maybe 6'2", 6'3". That is entirely possible in the Civic, and it's a problem in a lot of performance vehicles where there's just not enough headroom. That's all due to the fact that we don't have a sunroof in the Type R. So if you want that feature, you won't find it here, you might find it in something else. Jumping into the back, we find plenty of legroom. I have about 4 inches left with the front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. Headroom, however, that is a bit more limited. And that's because the Civic sedan and the Civic hatch have the same kind of profile right here in this area, and therefore very similar headroom. So you don't find the typical headroom advantage that you have in some of the other hatchbacks out there, like a Golf R. It really has more usable headroom in the rear. The other thing to keep in mind for the Type R is that this is a 4-seat vehicle only. No center seat back here like we do find in most of the competition. No shoulder belt, no armrest, just 2 cup holders right there in the middle. Also, no air vents in the center console, oddly enough. The rear seats still fold in a 60-40 fashion, but there's no armrest right here in the middle. The cup holders have been moved here to the seat bottom cushion, and we don't find any air vents in the back. A nice touch is that all 4 shoulder belts turn red, something that we don't find in every performance vehicle out there. Sometimes just the front shoulder belts change. The mission of a hot hatch and a performance SUV is essentially the same. Be a performance vehicle with the cargo carrying practicality of a regular hatch. Back here we find exactly the same kind of cargo capacity you find in a regular Civic hatch, which means you can very easily accommodate one Brian back here, and of course a 22-inch roller bag. We'll just put that back in there with him. What else do we find under that load floor, Brian?
Well, like the regular Civic hatchback, there is actually no spare tire back here and very minimal storage, but they do give you a fix-a-flat kit, right?
Yep. And then we have this interesting little roller shady cargo cover here, so that way you can tuck the kids in. Good night. Night-night, Brian.
Good night-night.
Now let's go for a spin around the interior. The Type R comes in only one trim. There's that ceiling. You can see that it's pretty high up there for the driver and front passenger, but definitely lower back there in the rear passenger area. Brian, how tall are you back there?
5'9".
And you seem like you fit okay back there.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so just if you're a taller torsoed or a taller person, you might have some troubles. Moving up front, you can see these 5-point harness styled front seats, but these are not designed for actual 5-point harnesses. We do, however, have the height adjustable shoulder belts. Fixed in-place headrests, however. I do wish these were perhaps a little bit more adjustable, because if you have a helmet on, that could be a bit of a consideration. But maybe Vanna can show us the side bolstering here on the front seats. That is pretty generous. You can see right there, pretty aggressive, I should say, for the seat back bolster and the seat bottom cushion bolster. One interesting style touch in here is this little pleat in the middle of the front seats. We have pleats on the sides as well, I should mention. This kind of looks like the Lincoln seat where you have individually adjustable thigh extensions, but of course we don't have that here with this seat design. Let me know what you think about that. I think it looks a little unusual. I guess you could use it to store your smartphone or something like that right in the middle, but it is kind of an unusual touch. Moving over to the front doors, red accents are the name of the game here. So we have a red stripe up there in that trim panel, soft touch materials above, also a faux suede insert right there in the door panel, matching what we have going on the seat in a different color. I should say that these seats are that faux suede material, same material going on the doors there. Moving over to the dashboard, we have the cheese grater setup that we find in a lot of modern Hondas, first started in the Civic, of course. The Type R badging right there on the dashboard with the serial number of this model. Every model is going to be serial numbered, and they are going to be fairly limited production. You can see the controls for the air vents there, and those air vents are entirely behind this cheese grater section. My one concern with the cheese grater dashboard is that it does seem like dust can get back there, and there doesn't seem to be a good way to get it out. Moving up here to the center of the dashboard, we have a large touchscreen infotainment system, 2 more air vents right there, and you can see this supports wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. If I click over to the home screen, you'll notice the big difference between the rest of the Civic lineup and this model, and that is the Log R app or Logger app. Over here, if I move over to that screen, you can see that we can swipe through different things like additional gauge readouts, the G meter, etc. You can also get the auto scoring for track day events, so you can see exactly how you've done there. You can sort by date, sort by score, etc. Data logging over there. And then under settings, this mainly has to do with the data logging settings rather than vehicle settings itself. There aren't as many settings that are adjustable in this vehicle as, for instance, we find in the Hyundai N line. If I toggle the drive mode selector that I'll show you in a bit here over to individual and then hit customize, this is where you can see the things that are customizable here. So engine, we have comfort, sport, R, steering, same 3 settings, ditto for the suspension, the engine sound, same thing there. Rev matching, just comfort and sport, and then the gauge, we have 3 different layouts. Moving over to the driver's side, this is what the plus R mode looks like. We also have a sport gauge layout, and then the comfort layout, which is very like sport, just in a different color. On the right side, you can roll through navigation, trip computer readouts, some auxiliary gauges, etc. And then on the left side, you can roll through your various media inputs. Moving back to the center of the dashboard, we find the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control, a red engine start stop button over there, a single USB input for the infotainment system, and a USB charge-only port. There's also a Qi wireless charging mat with enough room for some of those larger smartphones. And then down here we find the drive mode controls. This toggle allows you to choose from the 3 main drive modes, comfort, sport, and individual. The 4th drive mode is a one-axis button with that plus R button right up there. We then have the electric parking brake, auto brake hold, 6-speed manual transmission shifter with reverse in the right place. I really love it when reverse is to the right and down. I don't like it when it's up and to the left. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. We have 2 large cup holders here, basically the same setup as the regular Civic. And then in here is a little bit of a control so that you can open up that console, have access to that tiny storage area. The 3-spoke steering wheel is essentially the same as the regular Civic, except for the red Honda logo right there. We find the controls for the infotainment system over here on this side, and the controls for the adaptive cruise control on the right side, because even though this has a manual transmission and it's the performance model, we still have that nice touch of adaptive cruise control. And moving all the way over to the driver's side door, you can see that the red accent on the front doors is part of the ambient lighting system. It is illuminated right now. It's pretty easy to see in this lighting, but the rear doors don't have a red stripe. They just have the same sort of kink that we find in this shape, but no ambient lighting. A winding mountain road like the one that we're on is certainly the natural habitat for the Civic Type R. This is an awful lot of fun to drive. 0 to 60 times are likely going to be a bit quicker than the previous version. I suspect this is going to get 0 to 60 right around 5 seconds if you're willing to roast the clutch, likely 5.4 to 5.5 seconds for most drivers out there that are owning the car themselves and don't really want to destroy the clutch. Keep in mind that your 0 to 60 time is going to be dependent on exactly how brutal you are on that clutch plate. Now, as far as 60 to 0 stopping distances go, this is likely going to be around 100 feet because we have some seriously wide tires here. 265 with summer tires up front and in the back. Now, at the moment, those 265 with summer tires, they're not finding as much grip as they might like because it is pretty cold outside. It's about 40 degrees and it has been raining absolutely buckets out here in Northern California. So the roads are very, very wet. And that does highlight the fact that the Type R is a front-wheel drive performance vehicle. So not quite the same thing as the GR Corolla or the Golf R, which are, of course, all-wheel drive. And you will certainly notice the difference out on a road like this. In a corner, you just can't apply as much power because the front end starts to slide out there because we have limited traction in the wet weather here. Also, you will get a little bit of front-wheel hop if you really are aggressive on the throttle, even in a straight line, if the surface is less than perfect. In a moment, you're going to see me driving this on Sonoma Raceway. Hopefully it's going to be a little bit drier there. But even on this side of the mountain where the roads are a little bit drier, it's obvious this is gobs and gobs of fun. There is one thing you should know, however, and that is the ride quality. It is fairly firm, I would say. I was hoping that this would feel an awful lot like the Audi RS3. Even though the RS3 is a lot more expensive, that was sort of my vision for where the Type R might go, that or the S3. And instead, the suspension is definitely firmer. Even in the comfort mode, it is pretty darn firm, and there's just not as much suspension motion in this suspension design to really soak up some of the larger bumps out on this road surface. So if you're looking for a daily driver vehicle, you might want to look at something tuned a little bit softer. I do think that the GR Corolla is a little bit more daily driver appropriate. Even in the top-end versions, it did seem to be a little bit more cushy. Now, you should know, I have yet to drive the GR Corolla out on regular road surfaces, All the drives were on private roads, unfortunately, for that vehicle. Hopefully that video is going to be coming up soon, so be sure and stay tuned. If you engage the most aggressive drive mode, which is accessed by this +R button here in the center console, then things definitely get very, very firm. Sometimes even perhaps a little bit too bouncy out on a rougher road surface like this. So I think for most mountain drives, I would use individual and keep the suspension either in comfort or perhaps in sport. I like the fact that you can access that customized mode, so you can have everything else in +R except for the suspension, which you can keep in comfort. That certainly makes it more livable. Now, as far as handling capability goes, I would not be surprised if this was absolutely top of class, thanks to the really wide tires and the excellent suspension design. Even though this is front-wheel drive, torque steer is very, very well controlled. That's something that we saw in the previous generation Type R, and that all has to do with the front suspension design. But it does still exist. Around corners like this, you will still feel the tires kind of slipping and sliding around a little bit, the steering wheel tugging a little bit, especially in limited traction situations like the road surface that's a little bit damp right here. But to be honest, I have never been offended by torque steer. In fact, sometimes I find it a little bit fun. It doesn't have the purity that a rear-wheel drive biased vehicle would have, or an all-wheel drive vehicle might have, but it is certainly a bit more challenging to drive hard, and there's a certain amount of fun just in that. Now, as far as cabin quietness goes, I suspect this is going to be pretty similar to the regular Civic if we just calm things down and start driving more sedately. This has a pretty nice exhaust note. It's not too boy racer in the back, and that's thanks to the new active exhaust back there. It is louder and more raucous when you want it, and quieter when you want it to be quieter as well. Fuel economy is a little bit difficult to talk about because, of course, I've been driving this like a moron out here on these winding mountain roads, but I suspect if you treat it gently, you're going to get in the mid 20 mile per gallon range. Perhaps the best way to describe the new Type R is that this feels more mature, more grown up than the previous Type R. Some folks are going to love that, but I suspect a decent number of Honda fans are actually going to find that to be a problem. If you want something that is more of a raw experience, you're probably going to want to take a look at one of the Hyundai N products. They do feel a little bit more pure, a little bit more engaging, depending on exactly what you want out of your vehicle, especially the now gone Veloster N that is no longer available for sale, and the Elantra N feels a little bit more grown up than that model does, I think, at the moment. This is certainly going to be faster, it's going to handle better than those products, but the amount of connection that you have with the machine, I think, is a little bit diminished here. The steering is not quite as engaging as I might like. There is a little bit of numbness. It's very precise, but there's not a lot of feedback going on. The front-wheel drive nature of the vehicle, though, that is perhaps a bit more of a problem for some shoppers, especially considering the fact that we do have that GR Corolla now. I could see a lot of Honda fans saying, I don't want the Volkswagen, I don't want the Subaru, I don't want this or that because they're going to be less reliable, they're going to be more expensive to maintain, more expensive to insure, etc. But this is likely going to be substantially similar in terms of maintenance and repair costs and reliability to the GR Corolla. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if the GR Corolla was even more reliable than this. Out on the track, the first thing you're going to notice, obviously, is the front-wheel drive nature of the Type R. There are pros and cons to everything in automotive design, and the pro here is that you get noticeably less turbo bog and easier launches than you'd get in an all-wheel drive competitor, like the Golf R or the WRX or the GR Corolla. All of those, to some extent, will experience that turbo bog thing where you're trying to launch it in first gear, you don't get quite the right launch, and then you're down at too low of an RPM to really get the turbocharger going, so you have to make a decision. Do you stop and try again, or do you just live with the bog and attempt to accelerate out? You don't have that problem in the Type R. On the other hand, you get a lot of front wheel slip when launching it. Now, around the corners, this does have a heavier feel than some of the competition, most notably the GR Corolla, which surprised me a bit. Now again, full disclosure, it was cold when I'm driving this vehicle out here in Sonoma. It's cold, it is a little bit moist, and the GR Corolla with summer tires was on a track in the 90-degree weather in wherever that was. Utah, that's where that was. It was in Utah. At any rate, GR Corolla, hot weather in Utah, this cold weather in Sonoma, definitely a big difference. But I do love the all-wheel drive feel. Now, as far as refinement and control goes, this is excellent. A little bit less steering feel than I would like, but the chassis is really well tuned. The suspension that I found too firm out on the road is pretty perfect for track duty. So if you're doing autocross things, if you're doing track duty stuff, this is going to be just fine. But I will say that the size of the Type R does make it seem a little bit less suitable for some autocross events, I would say. And I think that the GR Corolla does that a little bit better. It feels a little bit smaller. It's only 8 inches shorter than this and right around the same width or a similar width to the Type R. So it's not as small as the Elantra N, but it does feel a little bit more suitable to those sort of autocross style courses that you might want to do on a weekend. This is going to be a bit more suited to bigger tracks like the Sonoma Raceway course that I'm on right now. Bearing in mind that it has been a pretty chilly day out here, no problems have been noticed with the braking or the cooling of the engine, etc. Cooling has been significantly improved in this generation, and the brakes are the biggest brakes the Civic has ever had. So if you're worried about that from the previous generation, you might want to give this one a try, but keep in mind it has gained about 100 pounds versus the outgoing model. And now to the nitty gritty. How much is a Type R going to set you back? Well, fortunately I have a laminated Monrooney here. The MSRP is $44,385 on this model. Now, fortunately, this model is essentially a base model and a fully loaded model simultaneously because the only option here is the white paint. Other than that, everything is standard. The 6-speed manual standard, the 265 with summer tires, and these wheels are standard on every model. We also have the LCD instrument cluster, the big LCD infotainment system, the red and black two-tone interior, etc. And all of Honda's latest active safety tech on the Type R, adaptive cruise control, the lane centering system, collision mitigating braking, all of that stuff is standard on every trim. What is not standard and not available on any trim though is all-wheel drive, as I said before, or a dual clutch or an automatic transmission, things that you will find on some of the competition. That will improve daily driver livability, but it also means that the Type R ends up being a little bit more exclusive than those other options. Now, exclusivity is cool, but it also means that this is going to be likely transacting way above MSRP. The previous generation Type R had absolutely bonkers markups on it, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. Basically, pick your number out of a hat, there's going to be a big markup on this model. And with this generation Type R, Honda has not committed to producing any more Type Rs than they did in the past, so expect the crazy markups to continue. For some folks, that's logically going to be a problem. For others, that just adds to the aura of exclusivity that the Type R has always had and will continue to have in this generation. Well, Brian, it seems to be about that time.
That is right. It's time to play Is It Worth It? Would you buy it? Starting with the Subaru WRX. It starts at $29,605 and only has 271 horsepower, but it does have all-wheel drive.
Yeah, and that makes it a really tricky decision for me. All-wheel drive or way more power? The Civic comes across as a bit more grown-up. The WRX is not a hot hatch anymore, though, interestingly. It is a hot sedan because the hatchback version is gone. And interesting twist, by the time you're watching this, we will probably know more details about the Impreza, but there is a trick up its sleeve because, you know, I'll save that for later. At any rate, heavily differentiated there between the Impreza and the WRX. This, not quite so much, so it has a bit more of a grown-up vibe to it. I like this interior more. But I really love all-wheel drive. Interestingly, I was driving that WRX on the same roads as this Civic Type R, also in the rain and in the wet. It did come across as having a lot more usable grip, just as you'd assume. Although, full disclosure for the Type R, we set out this morning at around 40 degrees. This has standard summer tires on it, so things were a little bit slick. I would probably, though, buy the Type R over the WRX if they could both be had for MSRP. At a $15,000 markup, I'd get to the WRX though.
I think for me too, I think I like the WRX because it's a little bit different because it has that sort of body cladding that people are very polarized about, and it has all-wheel drive. You can't really go wrong with all-wheel drive. That helps a lot. So for my money, I think I would go with WRX.
Now it's time for competitor number 2. Which one is that, Brian?
That's going to be the new GR Corolla from Toyota.
The Corolla.
The Corolla. It starts at $35,900, but it can go all the way up to nearly 50 grand if you get the special Maurizio edition. So you got some options there, but again, it has all-wheel drive, nearly as much horsepower and torque, but it's a little bit smaller than this. Yes. What do you think?
I'm intrigued. 300 horsepower, 295 pound-feet of torque, so pretty similar numbers to the previous Type R, but that all-wheel drive system is absolutely fantastic in the GR Corolla. To be honest, that is the car this year that exceeded expectations. I think I'm really good at predicting what things are gonna be like, and the GR Corolla, the Corolla blew me away. It was so much fun. It is a lot smaller than this because it actually is a hatchback rather than this lifty, sporty back thing that we have going on here. So the cargo area is a bit more compact, the parking dimensions are a bit more compact, the tires are a bit smaller, but there's not much of a weight penalty for that all-wheel drive system. The curb weight on this, depending on where I've been able to Google, and Honda has not given us a specific North American number yet, comes in between 3,288 pounds, as indicated by the GVWR minus the payload on the sticker, to about 3,150 pounds in the Japanese version. And any way you slice it, that means there's only about a 100-pound gap between GR Corolla, the Corolla, and the Typer. For that kind of price difference, I might get the GR Corolla, but its interior I think is terrible. I love this interior way, way more than the Corolla interior. It feels more modern, it feels more premium and more luxurious. These seats are nicer as well. And it's a roomier vehicle. The back seat is definitely roomier and the cargo area is bigger. But if we're simply talking fun to drive, Corolla gets my vote.
And for me, I think I would stick with the base Corolla, GR Corolla, and maybe swap out the seats for a red seat or something like that, make up the difference in price, and then you have that all-wheel drive system, and you do have the ability to add back the limited slip differential in the rear on that base Corolla if you add this one particular performance package. So you can get all that stuff and still be undercutting the price of this car. So I think I'd go Corolla.
And that is an interesting twist, an interesting point. The base GR Corolla can have the front and rear limited slip differentials that you find in the upper end trims, and you should be able to get both of them for less than this. We don't know what the production numbers are going to be like, but Toyota seems to indicate that they're not going to be as limited production as the Type R. That's a really interesting twist. What about option number 3?
Number 3 is going to be the Volkswagen Golf R, another R out there.
The Golfer?
The Golfer,
Yeah.
Sure. $44,290 is going to be the starting price. It also has 315 horsepower, but it also has all-wheel drive, another thing this one doesn't have.
Yeah, it also has a little bit of turbo bog if you get the manual transmission. Now that's lessened if you get the dual clutch transmission, which is probably how I would get the Golf R, because it is going to be wicked fast with the dual clutch. And I love this manual transmission more than the manual transmission that we find in the Golf R. You'd think that the Germans would be able to do a good manual transmission, but I think Honda has done one better with this Type R. I love the fact that it has a manual, but as a daily driver, which theoretically hot hatches are all about, the dual clutch transmissions, the automatic transmissions, they do seem to make a bit more sense, except for the CVT and the WRX. Don't do that one. Just get the manual there.
For me, with the Golf R, I actually think it has the nicer interior, despite the unfortunate touch buttons that most people hate, the touch capacitive buttons. Other than that, though, I do like the Golf R package, and I think the all-wheel drive, and the look is good too. It's even less, out there than this one. It doesn't have as much of a wing. It doesn't have, I don't even remember what the tires are like on that one.
And it's actually hatchy.
It's
it has
hatch.
that square profile. It is the classic ultimate hot hatch in many ways. Now for a twist, what do you think of the other performance sedan in this segment, the Elantra N, or as I like to call it, the Elantra N?
Yeah, the Elantra N is a really, really good package in my opinion. I do prefer the more visceral audible experience with the pops and the
pops are good.
The cool sounds that come out of that exhaust are just really exciting, and you can turn them off or turn them down. You can't really, well, you can notice the difference between the exhaust note on this, but where you really notice the difference in the drive modes on that car is the suspension.
It's never going to Rice Krispie though on the track. It's never going to snap, crackle, pop that same way.
But this car, even in its most comfortable setting, was still bouncy like the N modes on the Elantra. So, if you want something a little bit softer, it's not going to be this.
Yeah,
the Elantra
is
definitely
a lot more power than we get in that Elantra N.
You do get a lot more power, but I feel like the sound and the experience, and if you want the dual clutch, that fast shifting transmission, that makes up experience-wise.
And lower price tag.
And a lower price tag by a lot.
So what's your pick? Lower price tag?
Elantra N for me.
Elantra N? I think, again, assuming you could MSRP either of them, I think I might Type R instead of Elantra N. They're both front-wheel drive, but this one has a level of purity that I like a bit more. It also feels a bit more grown-up. It's a bit bigger, a bit heavier feeling, and I know a lot of people are going to be offended by that, but I kind of like that. And maybe, the whippersnapper on the team is after the rawer, lighter experience that you find in the Elantra N. So we must pick a winner in this segment, but that is going to happen when we can get this at home and drive it for a complete week. In the meantime, let us know what you think about all that down there in the comment section. And if you're shopping in this segment, again, assuming you could get any of these options for MSRP, would you Subaru Works, would you Corolla, would you Golfer, would you Typer, or would you Elantra N?